Well, welcome to another episode of the Business is Mission podcast. I am here with a friend of mine. I think we first met in 2019 when
Right.
we had a Business is Mission conference over there where he lives in Romania. His name is Sebastian Vaduva. And his profile, I'm going to give you real quickly. He says, Professor, Entrepreneur, Business Technology Executive. So he wears a lot of hats. But Sebastian, first of all, thanks for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the great job you're doing for the movement. Keep it up.
Well, I retired, supposedly retired 5 years ago, so I get to do a lot more of this. This is all good.
Good.
But I thank you for that. So Sebastian and I bumped into each other a couple of months ago now in Vancouver, British Columbia. He and I were both there for the Vancouver Businesses Mission Conference. It was really, really fun. Um,
Mhm.
and it was like, wow, I know you. And so we started chatting, and it's great to catch up. He's continued on in the movement. So and that's why I wanted to invite you to the show and just have you on. So, Sebastian, give us, as we typically do, give us a little bit of background on you and how you got to where you are now. You've got a really varied story. This is not a one-track story. It's for the audience. So just you share it with us, and what you feel like people need to know about you, what you feel like God has done in your life, and we'll
Right.
we'll rejoice in that.
Well, I think that's the starting point. As the Protestant used to say, "Soli Deo Gloria," to God be the glory for everything. So I am proof that God's grace is sufficient and it's working. So my story begins in communist Romania. I was born in 1976, and I grew up for the first 12 years of my life in communist Romania. And again, for those who are not familiar with what communism meant, it typically meant oppression, it meant poverty, somewhat of a persecution. So I remember as a little kid being taken out and ridiculed by my teachers and some of the colleagues for the fact that I was a Christian.
Mm,
Uh, Evangelical Christians were not really outlawed, but kind of looked down upon. They're not allowed to hold, education. They're not allowed to have, real jobs. They were viewed as almost enemies of the state. So I grew up in this environment up until the age of 12. Then at the age of 12, I went to the United States of America. My father emigrated a few years before. And then in 1989, this was before the revolution,
mm,
we got to the US. And again, in the mind of a little boy, I thought that I was going to go to the promised land. I thought that America was going to be just, heaven on earth. And it was, by comparison to the dark, cold place which Romania was. I remember landing in Chicago, Illinois, and just seeing the lights and seeing the
mm.
food and seeing everything. I thought it was incredible, and it was good. I really enjoyed it. However, on a personal note, 3 months later, our father left us. Uh,
Uh,
so, so there we were, my mother and my two brothers. We moved to Cleveland where we had an aunt, and we were literally on the streets. I mean, we rented an apartment, and I had started working. So when people ask me how I became an entrepreneur, I became an entrepreneur out of necessity,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and I realized that I had that skill set. Now, again, at the time, I didn't speak any English, so I learned the most important word in the English language, which is work. I would go
yeah.
door to door to door and ask people for jobs. And I discovered a very hospitable, very friendly culture. And again, these were not necessarily Christians that would hire me and would have me shovel their snow or cut their grass, clean around the houses. And eventually I ended up working for a butcher shop as a 12-year-old boy in
Mm,
inner city Cleveland. And a few years later, I worked myself up to a point where I actually bought my boss out. So I borrowed $25,000 in my mother's name. I was not legal to sign papers. I was 17 at the time. My mother couldn't speak English, so she just kind of signed the paperwork that I put in front of her. So it was just an interesting partnership between my mother and I. And that's how I became an entrepreneur and started my first company. Since then, I've probably been involved in about 25 to 30 startups. Most of them failed because I've been doing them with students, and because, they were really not designed to be successful. But I got the bug early on. Unfortunately, during this time, I also entered a very rebellious stage in my life against God, against Romania. I didn't want
Mm,
anything to do with
mm.
the church. I didn't want anything to do with the fact that I was Romanian. I was actually embarrassed by that. But God had mercy. And interestingly, I was saved by watching a TV documentary called The Shame of a Nation. It was an ABC special, Barbara Walter special on a Friday night, and
Boy,
just
that's an unusual testimony.
very unusual. So, that it goes to show you how powerful God's grace is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
He can use, national television in America to reach a poor immigrant boy like myself. And here I am watching the plight of these orphan kids in Romania and kind of like what's going on behind it. Because, once the communism fell, all the nasties came out and we realized what was really going on behind the scenes. But watching those kids, it's though I heard God whispering to me, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Stop being angry.
Mm,
It could have been much worse. Here you are, you're in the greatest nation on earth. You have the skill set of entrepreneurship. You can do sales. You've learned the language. You're doing very good by comparison.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and I gave my life to the Lord, and I said, God, whatever you'll have me do,
beautiful.
including if you want me to go back there. Now, again, I was a young man. I didn't know God was going to take me seriously,
Y-
but I tell my students, I'm like, careful what you promise to
I-
the Lord.
He
He may do it.
absolutely. You just real quickly, you made a comment, Sebastian, which I think is really important for our audience. So many people that are from, we'll say the West, and I mean that primarily North America, Western Europe, view entrepreneurialism. I want to go back to your comment about how you got into it. We tend to view entrepreneurialism as an excessive created mind, or you're born with a gift, and I think there's some truth to that, of course. But we've tended, because of the affluence of the West, we've tended to ignore the power of necessity.
Sure.
In fact, when we first started working in Kyrgyzstan back in the early 90s, right after the Soviet Union collapsed, my argument was that starvation is a pretty good motivator. And
Yep.
for a father to watch his children unable to eat, or in your case, a son,
Yeah.
seeing his mother, unable to live,
Yep.
that's a pretty good motivator. And I just want to point that out, because I think there's a tendency to think if you don't have the Steve Jobs crazy gene, you're really not an entrepreneur. Well, yeah, you are, because the word itself just means somebody who starts and does things. The French word entrepreneur literally
Yep.
means one who does things.
Yeah. Doer.
So I love that you said that. I just want to, for our audience, I know a lot of people listening to this thinking, well, I don't have that crazy mind. I don't have that crazy gene. Okay, good. You don't have to.
Right.
Do what's in front of you, and if it's starting a business, God may prosper it, and you may fail. It happens. But thank you for sharing that. What a beautiful testimony. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody say they came to Christ watching Barbara Walters. So I think you're the only one you probably others, but you're the first one ever said that.
Right. Yeah. Well, the Spirit of the Lord can work in mysterious ways.
Amen. Yeah.
And what I do want to encourage people is that once you give your life to God, God is going to do wonderful things through you. So if in 1989 I was a poor immigrant kid living in the inner city of Cleveland, by 1999 I'd finished my MBA at Case Western Reserve in entrepreneurship, and I was a young university professor at the University of Akron. My plan was really to go and work for McKinsey as a consultant.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this was the dot-com boom. I was going to do valuations for AOL and Yahoo and those firms. But God had a better plan, and God said, no, I want to start working and preparing you eventually to move to Romania. Now, again, I was a reluctant customer all the way through.
Yeah.
So God got me into the University of Akron in 1999, and I'm like, oh, this is fine. I'm just going to be a university professor. I will travel to Romania once a year or so and just do a week of courses. But God wanted it more.
Mm-hmm.
In parallel, in my home country, in my hometown actually of Oradea, Romania, even back to the communist days, there was an underground pastoral training program called the School of the Prophets.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this was illegal underground training program. And going back to the 70s and the 80s, we had people like John Stott and Billy Graham that came during that period of time to encourage that movement. It was a movement started by the Second Baptist Church of Oradea. Dr. Paul Negrutz was the pastor, and later, after the revolution, he said, we're going to set this into a university. But the thought was that it was going to be a theological seminary. Then about the mid-90s, through a series of divine appointments and connections with Lord Brian Griffiths and John Lenton and some other people, predominantly from the UK, also the McClellan Foundation from Chattanooga, Covenant College, and some other people, the thinking was, let's set up a business school within this theological seminary. And this
How
was,
unusual, but I love it.
Very, very unusual. And as you can imagine, there was no blueprint behind it. John Lenton was instrumental. He was an executive with American Express. Just read the book Halftime, Bob Buford's, and he felt convicted to do something for the Lord. And in a matter of weeks, God just sort of opened doors, and he came to Oradea. He wrote a business plan, and then God moved in his heart, said, well, you're supposed to implement this business plan. And he did. He moved to Romania in 1998. So there's like these parallel worlds. I was finishing my MBA, starting at the University of Akron, and then John Lenton was moving to Oradea and establishing this business school within a theological seminary. And I think we met the first time in 2000 in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay.
And he looked at me and he said, Sebastian, I think God's calling you to come back and sort of continue the work that I'm starting, And obviously, being a very obedient and faithful person, I said, absolutely not.
Yeah, like most of us, right? Here am I, Lord, send somebody else.
Send somebody else, So like I said, I was a reluctant customer. But again, God just kept nudging at my heart. So, to a series of events, I was a Fulbright Scholar in Republic of Moldova in 2004. And then in 2005, I married my wife, who was at that time a student at Emmanuel University. And God really sweetened the deal. He said, okay, you have a wife now, you have a ministry partner. Emmanuel University is your ministry. So in 2005, I moved permanently.
Yeah.
And again, my responsibility was predominantly to get the school accredited to meet the governmental standards. But at the same time, and this is a struggle that we have to this day, although the school is accredited and it's at high trust, it issues degrees in business and information technology. We also have a master's program. How do we keep it accredited while at the same time work on the discipleship? Be salt and light and encourage people to do business as a mission. So that's very much interwoven.
So that's a great point. Let me ask you about that a little bit. I guess the accreditation authorities, the councils or associations or whatever it happens to be, and if you're not in academia, they're different in different countries, and there's some global ones as well. They're challenging on a good day. It's not easy to get or stay accredited, but you're implying or stating that there was a bit of a, I'll say conflict, maybe that's too strong, but a bit of a conflict between being a solid academic university in the minds of the accreditation agency, being a solid academic institution and doing discipleship, spiritual impact, business as mission. Talk about that just a little bit, Sebastian, because that's the first I've heard of that. Doesn't surprise me. I just haven't heard that before.
I don't think it's by design. It just so happens because you have limited time and limited resources, So when you look at a university professor, according to everybody, is supposed to teach. However, according to accreditors, he or she is supposed to research, is supposed to publish. Okay, so behind the scenes, we have the saying, you either publish or you perish. That's how you maintain the accreditation. And oftentimes, especially in our context, because we are in Europe and now we're in the European Union and we are accredited by the powers to be coming all the way from Brussels, it's this tension of being and allocating time to research, to publish papers and things like that. And then you're also supposed to teach. And us being a Christian institution, we go a step further and we also want to mentor. So I don't think there is a design where people say, well, don't do teaching and mentoring. but I think it's really where they say, well, the number one priority for accreditation is publications and the research. So you just don't have the physical time to do it all. So I think this is where the struggle comes. How do you balance this?
Hmm.
Ideally, you're supposed to have a nice little triangle between the three activities where you keep it in balance. In practice, it's pretty difficult balancing act.
Yeah, I can see that, and I appreciate your clarification because I was wondering, was there a bias against Christianity in the accreditation agency? It sounds like that wasn't the problem. It's just the sheer load, the workload, the burden that comes with doing all of that. So,
Exactly.
right,
I mean, we did have one person that did not necessarily agree with Christians, and they would say, you're either a Christian or you're an academic. You cannot be both. I've had people say that to me. But institutionally, we have not had any kind of hostility like that.
sure, and that makes sense. Okay, so you are now back in Romania. You've God's
Sure.
gifted you with a wife. You probably live by that verse. If you find a wife, finds a good thing and obtains favor with the Lord.
Amen.
And you guys are launching and building Emmanuel University. So pick it up. But that's just what a great already it's it's almost like a movie. This is such a such a God story.
It is a God story. And the best part about what we do are the students who then turn into graduates who then, go on and start businesses. And again, we tell every one of our students that we want them to be visionaries, business missionaries,
Mm,
you know.
hmm.
Uh, so there is this notion that only people who serve on Sunday as a pastor, as a missionary, so we very much, and this is one of the areas that we had to publish and research, and we did courses on what are the biblical bases for work, what are the biblical bases
Hmm.
for ministering, and the way I talk all the time is that for a business person, their profession is their pulpit, and oftentimes a business person has more impact and more opportunities to impact than even a pastor because they travel, they interact
Absolutely.
there's also, and I use this term very often, the distinction between a satisfied customer and a paid salesman. I think there's a misconception against pastors, like, well, of course you're going to preach the gospel and tell me that I should live holy living. That's your job. You went to
Yeah.
seminary. That's what you're supposed to do.
That's my story. I heard when I was a pastor, I heard that loud and clear, as you know, and it broke my heart that they thought I did that because of money.
Right, right, right. Exactly. So I think that business people have a unique opportunity to do what I call Monday through Friday ministry, to go and interact with people that normally wouldn't come inside of a church. And keep in mind, we're in the European Union, where less than 10% of the people go to church on a Sunday morning.
Mm.
People are very materialistic, but people are very progressive in their ideas. Some would say quite liberal. So we have quite the mission field, in terms of being salt and light. And I think that Romania has a unique position to impact both Western Europe and the Eastern part. We're on the cusp of the
Hmm.
1040 window. We have historical relationships with the Ottoman Empire, all the way to India, parts of North Africa. So I think Romanians are kind of like in the linchpin of civilizations, as Samuel Huntington would call us. And I'm really grateful that the Spirit of the Lord is moving, and there is that missionary zeal, and we are thinking about how can we be of service to people around us. Because for the last 35 years since the revolution, we have really been helped. We had a lot of partners that came over, helped us, building the buildings, establishing the churches and everything else. So my prayer is that over the next period of time, we're going to be the ones helping out.
Well, it's interesting. First, I got to say, I'll sound like a tourist advertisement. I love Romania. I've been there a couple of times. It's a beautiful country. I find the people, on the whole, to be incredibly welcoming and friendly and helpful. Of course, that's not everybody, but it's not everybody everywhere or anywhere. But I loved it. Always felt very at home there, very welcome. And when I was there the second time, and I forget now, it was 2021, maybe 2022, coming off the the pandemic. And I remember when I was speaking, we had a business as mission conference that was sponsored by the BAM Connect there, and uh, the Lord just gave me a word. I don't usually have this happen, but He gave me a word to say that I believe that Romania is going to be one of those epicenters of business's mission for that part of the world. And you remember that, and it was not. I don't usually make prophecy per se, but it felt very very clear that God is doing something very special. So I just want to affirm what you're saying. I agree with you. And for those of you listening who, if you haven't been able to get to Romania and meet with some of the brothers and sisters there, some of the things that God is doing, it is very powerful. And it's not without opposition. It's not without problems, but you can, I won't say feel it. That's not the right word, but you can sense it. You can sense that, and you've heard me say this, Sebastian, before. Aslan is on the move.
That's right.
And Romania is one of those countries where that's really, really true. So I love it. Keep going. This is a great story, brother.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate all the people that we know and all the people that we don't know who have contributed, with their prayers, with their gifts, with their ideas and everything else, including my own story. I would not be where I'm at, as a university professor, as a business executive and a corporate trainer, if it weren't for people behind me who coached me, who mentored me, who encouraged me. So I'm extremely grateful. And the verse that I grew up listening from my mom is, to whom much is given, much is required, and I realized that. And again, that's a personal thing for me, but also an institutional and a national thing for us as Romanians. I am very, very grateful for what we have received, and I think that makes us responsible. So we do give and pass that on, and, to your point, going back to both history and the scripture. I mean, Christianity first came in Romania in the 17th century to the Moravian brothers, who were by and large tradesmen. Again, they were coming out of the Protestant Reformation, and they came here for work. They came here because this was kind of like the edge of the empire, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they brought the gospel through trade. People looked at them and said, "Oh my goodness, they're so inventive. They're such hardworking individuals. My goodness, they treat their families so well. They're so civilized. They're so washed. They're so clean." So the basis of Romanian Christianity is that Protestant heritage, and I'm looking at the 21st century, and I think that some of that can be used to further the gospel, farther east. The other example that I'm taking from the scripture is the example of Daniel, where I'm seeing kind of like a global shift, with governments being more influential and being more active, whether through tariffs or through subsidies and things like that. So increasingly, I'm seeing this mindset of entrepreneurship and business that is needed even within governments as public administrators. And I'm looking at the model of Daniel, of Nehemiah, and some of the other people used by God in the Old Testament. And my prayer moving forward in the 21st century is that we will continue to be users of the resources that God's placing us. Whether it is from the European Union, whether it is from large organizations, and just channel that for the betterment of the people around us, and obviously for God's glory. So I'm very excited about the future. You can tell that we have great. I feel that at our university, Emmanuel University, and within the community, because you mentioned the community, we are a thriving Christian business community. The BAM people here. Again, I don't want to throw numbers, but there's about 10,000 of us. Plus, there's a very powerful diaspora movement, which now is kind of waking up. Individuals that have left for a while, places like Ireland, Italy, Canada, who are now thinking, hey, listen, how can I use my business, my profession as my pulpit so I can do ministry? So I'm seeing all this movement. It's almost like first century, people building tents together, and they're doing a business thing, and they're going to travel to Africa, and then they're going to come back, and they're going to do a trip to South Korea. Very exciting times. Very, very exciting times.
What a beautiful thing Sebastian, what I'm hearing you describe is that Romania is not to be understood as a receiving country,
Right.
but as a sending country.
Correct.
And that again, your history is beautiful when you bring that in. The Moravians, they are known for their integration of business and faith together. And so the seeds were planted there by a group that was also known for the 100 Years prayer meetings. This is not man's ingenuity. This is not just human drive. This is a God thing, a God movement continuing, even through all the dark times. And obviously you lived it when I was there, and I heard many of the stories of Ceausescu and his reign of terror. But how God has just kept the church, kept the body through that, and now it is blessing the world once more.
Yes.
That's just God, it's so encouraging. So at the university, and I know it's not the only thing you do. Like I say, you're an entrepreneur. You start businesses. You consult. You train outside in the corporate world. Technology is a big thing for you.
Mhm.
But you are, I think, at heart a professor. It seems like that. If you had to pick one title, that would
Yeah.
probably be it.
Mhm.
Um, so and I'm gonna expand this to a series of questions. But as a professor working with generally younger people,
Right.
what do you see from a worldview perspective? What do you see from a business's mission perspective that both encourages you and challenges you at this point? Because you have a unique perspective on that.
Yeah. That's a good question, Mike, and thank you. The thing that I think is most challenging is the advent of technology, and just the many opportunities that people. We say young people, but I think people in general have to waste time, to deceive themselves.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that's the big challenge that we have in front of us. Individuals thinking that they're getting an education, but instead, they're on TikTok all day long, or things like that. I think that's a huge temptation. I think that is absolutely a huge temptation. At the same time, I see technology as a tremendous opportunity. I'm a big believer in technology as a tool, both to share the gospel, but also to do business, to innovate, to invent new things. I'm very excited about artificial intelligence, and all the products and
Hmm.
services that I think it's going to bring, and the opportunities that it's going to have to make us more productive, to do more with less, and things like that. So, in one word, what both scares me and excites me is technology.
Hmm.
And the message I'm sending is that as Christians, we need to be at the forefront of that. As the scripture says, we need to be like the sons of Issachar. We need to know the times, and kind of like how the Lord is moving,
Hmm.
and what God's allowing, and to know how to utilize that for the kingdom. I think that's key.
So interesting. I was talking with somebody yesterday on the podcast who is introducing uh, I don't know how to describe it. It's a biblical narrative, not verse by verse, but the biblical narrative in a media format, in a visual format. It's very powerful. And we were talking about this. We were talking about the Gutenberg printing press, which was just technology, right? I mean, forget for a moment, but it was a technology God used to change the world, making the Bible available, to the masses. But at the same time, printing in its day did a lot of destruction, did a lot of I mean, bring and to this very day, a lot of things in print are
Yeah.
destructive to families, destructive to communities, nations. I mean, so it's not the technology, it's the way we use the technology. And I think AI, you went there, is
Yeah.
another one of those things. Christians cannot be afraid of technology. They cannot be condemning of technology or artificial intelligence. They can't. We've got
Yeah.
to learn how to use it, how to engage with technology for the kingdom. And that's, I mean, you can pick any technology. You can pick the telephone for Pete's sake, and I mean, you can pick anything you want, television, but all of it. So I love that you went there, and I agree with you. By the way, I think you said it well. It's a kind of a two-edged sword. It's a
Right.
great challenge and it's a great opportunity. So,
Mhm.
another question for you about students. How do you see, and I know Emmanuel is a Christian based university, so it's going to be a little biased in favor of my question, but when you think about the larger world of students, what do you see as difficulty in terms of us engaging them for the kingdom, number one, to really be kingdom minded, and then for businesses mission integration? And I'm asking, here's why I'm asking that. I'm getting up there in years, as we say, a little long in the tooth, and so I'm very passionate about the next generation. And
Right.
so I'm constantly asking the question, how do we engage them for what God is doing in the world? So I'm going to let you, I'm going to just steal your answer and put it out there.
Yeah, thank you. And again, even though I work in a Christian university, my heart is for the general public. So I very much, and some of the initiatives that we're having now with a few startups, with online education, with some of the courses that I've developed, I have a personal website. All these things we're doing so we can reach non-Christian students.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
For instance, we've established, along with a colleague of mine, he's the lead person on it, Romanian Academic Network, which is a network of about 200 or so university professors in various fields, majority of them teaching in secular schools. So we very much have a heart for the non-Christian students. So you asked me, what do I see some of their challenges, or how to reach them and engage them? I think that if we take a look at what's been happening in the last 30 years, I think education has been confiscated by left-leaning progressives
mm-hmm,
that have gone into a lot of administrative roles, university presidents, college deans, things like that. And they hired a lot of like-minded individuals, So there is, and there's, again, this is not conspiracy theory. There's proof. The Economist, which is a left-leaning publication,
mm-hmm.
actually had a whole special report on, how universities went woke, and it started in America, and it pretty much went all over the world. So you have the long march through the institutions, where you have a number of professors that are trying to persuade the students towards left-leaning ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about left-leaning ideology is that it's built upon an illusion, about an idealized world that doesn't exist. And we, as people who've experimented communism, we know the appeal of an idealized world. Why things ought to be like this. Wouldn't it be nice if we were to have, free healthcare? Wouldn't it be nice if we were to have free education, and so on and so forth? And people can feed their lives with a lie, with a deception like
Mm-hmm.
that. And what I'm seeing is that a lot of the young people are sort of falling prey to that. They're very angry at the world around them, because in their mind, they're always fed with, well, this is the way the world ought to be. Well, boy, there's a conspiracy theory out there. Well, if big business, if big pharma, if these people would really wanted to help us out, then, the price of housing wouldn't be so expensive, so on and so forth. So I think that young people are lacking role models, and
Mm-hmm.
how do we get back to that? It's exactly what Jesus taught us: go and make disciples. Unfortunately, oftentimes as Christians, all we do is preach. We're kind of enamored to have a big crusade, have a big show. We're going to be in there for a week-long revival, and then we leave people, we drop them. And I'm looking at some of the liberal evangelists, and I use that individuals that are not godly, that they go out there and they have the time and they spend the time with these young
Mm-hmm.
people, and they answer their questions and they disciple. Oftentimes I see Christians being too busy, doing projects and doing activities, and they don't have time to teach. And I'll give you a few examples. Teach America, which is a very interesting organization, and I agree with many of the things they're doing. Oftentimes is staffed by people who are not necessarily espousing Christian values. And I'm just praying for
Mm-hmm.
people from the Christian world that are going to go into the universities, that are going to go into the high schools, that are going to go into the trade schools, into the inner cities, and just make disciples. And it's not Bible study and coffee. We always think about that.
Yeah.
Let's get people together and let's have them some cookies and coffee. Oftentimes, it's providing these people jobs. I think that
Mm-hmm.
the young generation is risking unemployment. Yuval Noah Harari calls them the useless generation. That we really don't need them, which I think is a sacrilege. I
Yeah.
mean, God created individuals, and they have inherent value because they are created in the image of God. Our responsibility is to equip them and to give them hope, to give them perspectives, to tell them the truth and say, look, if you do want to have a successful life, I recently wrote a book, the trademarks and temptation of successful people.
Hmm.
And it's about hard work. We have the proven recipe. It's in the Bible, it's in the scripture. You're supposed to get up, you're supposed to work, you're going to do things that you don't necessarily like because you have to do them. That's a discipline piece. You're going to get rejected. You can't let your feelings be hurt. And these are the messages that young people, both in the Christian community, but especially outside of the Christian community, they need to hear.
Yeah.
And they need to understand that, social media, drugs, liberal ideology, these are all short-term deceptions. And sooner or later, they're going to be disheartened.
So quick.
Sorry, I really get started here.
No, I gotta tell, I love it. And so, quick question for you on the book. Give us the title again, and we'll have it in the show notes. But is it in English? And where can? Not yet.
Not yet. So I'm translating in English. It's the trademarks and temptations of successful people.
Okay.
And again, what's unique about the book is because there's a lot of book on, well, here's what successful people look like. So I took some of that, but then I also put here are the temptations.
Mm-hmm.
So for every trademark, there is a risk that you need to be careful of. And kind of like the subtitle is that tall mountains have deep valleys. So, you got somebody who's very gifted, somebody who's sort of a natural born leader, or somebody who's very creative or very charismatic. But that person may be tempted to deceive. That person may be tempted to, manipulate people.
Yes, indeed. Well, and I can't wait for it to be available in English. So you will keep me posted, please. I'll
keep posted. Yeah,
okay.
Maybe we'll do a podcast just on that.
Absolutely. When it comes time, we'll do a release of the book. I love it. The second question, this will kind of be my last big question for you is. And I mentioned to you before we got started, you have a unique perspective, right? You live in Romania, but you lived in America, the U.S. for quite some time, so you've got kind of a whole world perspective. But you also have that unique Eastern European perspective on what's happening in the world, particularly in business's mission. And because so much of what we read, so much of what we hear, is really coming with the sort of Anglo-American bias, and it's not an evil bias, it's just the lens through which we see the world. From your perspective, what do you see? And I know this could be a totally different podcast as well, so we'll keep it brief, but what are the 2 or 3 big things you see, positive and or negative, that we, the rest of the movement globally, need to hear that's a little more internationally based?
Yeah. I'm going to follow up with what I said earlier. I think that the single greatest contribution that a BAM business can make is to create jobs. And knowingly or unknowingly, when we look at the way the economy has developed, and I'm just going to use the Amazon example, over the last 20, 30 years, it has been technology replacing humans. You look at robotics. I think that one of the big global challenges that we have is that now that China developed, we cannot utilize the Chinese model to develop Africa. In other words, we cannot transfer the low wage jobs to Africa because those jobs are being taken by technology. Mm-hmm. So the question is, what are we going to do with the almost 10 billion people that I think we're going to have in the next 2 or 3 decades? So if I were to make a recommendation, we have to be thinking in terms of services. How do we create jobs that are service oriented, that employ many, many people, to give people purpose, to give people a livelihood, to give people dignity? So this would be one of the big ones. The second thing is we need to empower, and I know I'm subjective because this is my story, we need to empower the diaspora. I think that God has a unique community in every single language group of individuals that have left their native country and for a time are living in the West. They're being educated, they've been exposed, they have contacts. Those individuals, I believe, are the best agents to go back, rebuild. And again, this is the Bible, so when God wanted to rebuild the temple, he brought Nehemiah. who, for all intents and purposes, was probably born in Babylon, okay, had dual citizenship, and he had access to the king's credit card, So this is kind of the profile of a person that can come back and do rebuilding. So I think that the BAM movement needs to really focus intentionally on how do we get, the Afghanis, how do we get the Africans, how do we get people from Congo, that now live in England or in America or in France, to go back and do business, and not make it too easy for them. I do see this tendency where we sort of make things easy. When I returned back to Romania, one of my biggest decision was, will I have U.S. sponsorship for my daily living? And it was fairly easy for me to do because it was 2005. I had a large network of contacts. I was a leader in the Baptist community. But I made a decision, and I don't want to boast about it. And I said, if I want to have credibility in front of my students, I cannot have a monthly paycheck coming from America. I need to prove what I'm preaching. If I'm telling them that it's possible to live in Romania and to do business clean without, corruption, I have to do that. And man, I struggled. I took on some debts, and I had some failures, and I did some free work, until things got started, But now looking back, I think that also gave me credibility, and it also sort of streamlined, what really works. So for instance, when I came over 20 years ago, I'm like, I'm going to open a coffee house and I'll have a little Starbucks in Oradea. Well, I'm not sure I would have been able to survive if I would have been trying to sell coffee here. So instead, I opened a consulting company, a training company. I started a school of information technology. We started an organic farm. Things that were more contextual to Romania. And again, the ones that did survive did quite well, provided jobs and income and things like that.
I just have to give you major applause and kudos for taking that stand. That's been, for me, a hot button in the world of business as mission is if you're doing, wherever you're living, if you're actually getting a paycheck from home, it's not really, whatever you're doing, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's evil, but it's not business. Part of business is you live off of what you do. And
Yeah.
so I,
Yeah.
I love that you did that. I don't say that in judgment of anybody. You don't either.
Right.
But I do think it's right. I think it's the biblical model, kind of an eat what you kill
Right.
mindset. I think that's really healthy. All right, here's the last question, very generic. So what advice would you give our listeners? This is really a cheap shot, an unfair question, but I'm going to do it anyway. Our listeners are all over the world. There are many in the West, but also a lot in Africa, a lot in Asia, a lot in Eastern Europe. So when you just look out over this business's mission landscape, and our practitioners are little businesses, large businesses, expatriates, nationals, it's a real mixed bag. Give us just from your heart, brother. Give us some counsel and advice.
I'm not going to give anything from me. I will give it from the Lord. So before the Lord went to heavens, He said, "Go make disciples." And I think that's the essence. I think that's the essence of Christianity. That's the essence of business as a mission. Making disciples, passing on the things that you have learned, whether they are your Christian faith, whether it is your trade, your knowledge, whether you're good in finance, whether you're good in engineering, whether you're good, coffee tradesman or coffee roaster, whatever it is that you're good, make yourself available and invest that into other people. If it turns into a business and those people become your employees and you'll build a large multinational company, God bless you. We look forward to your donations and we look forward to your generosity. If you're never going to charge for it and no business is going to come of it, that's fine. My verse when it comes to this is 1 Corinthians 3:6, where Paul says, "I planted, Apollo waters, God makes it grow."
Amen.
So that's another distinction between a Christian business person and a secular business person. We're not necessarily responsible for the results, and I'm not saying we should be lazy or not be accountable. But what I am saying is that it is up to God to bring things to fruition. Having been in Romania for 20 years, I have been surprised, both pleasantly and unpleasantly, by people that I expected based on my discipleship and, investment in that they were going to do great, mighty things. And they didn't for whatever reason. That's between them and God. And vice versa. People that I didn't think were going to amount to anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that, I'm not going to go anywhere. Boy, did they surprise me? Did they blossom into just a great godly men and women doing great and wonderful things? So again, it's what Jesus told us: go make disciples, invest yourself in people, be intentional, be methodical about it. If people don't want to listen to you, go to the next group and go to the next group, and just keep investing in people. People are the eternal value. Everything else is a tool. Whether it's a company, whether it's a car, whether it's a website, those are instruments that we want to use for God's kingdom. People are the intrinsic value that people are that God created.
Amen. Well, I've concluded this already, Sebastian. You are coming back, and not just when you get your book out. We'll do that too. But you have so much experience and wisdom that God has given you, and I love how you keep bringing us back to Scripture and saying, guys, this is what God has taught me. This is what I see in the Word, and that's so encouraging. I can see why God raised you up and put you in the role that you're in. So, thanks for being with us, and you will be back on.
Thank you, Mike, for the work you're doing, and everybody who's listening and following us. God knows you. May He encourage you and keep keeping up. So you're doing great work. God bless you.
Thank you, brother.